This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
So please welcome them all.
So just tell me if you can hear me okay? Yeah, great. So just before I start my paper, I just want to quickly say you might notice in the programs that this talks about Craft South's project, but they've since changed their name to Guildhouse, so I'll be referring to them as Guildhouse throughout the paper. So the paper I'm going to read today focuses on the role and importance of handmade crafts in constructing and sharing narratives of the self, focusing on the Guildhouse Traditional Craft Skills Project, which is such a mouthful to say that I'm going to just say the project throughout the paper, where traditional craftspeople taught their skills to the general public. I'm also going to be looking at the oral histories that were recorded as part of the creative partnerships that concluded this project, and Kay and Miss Yuma were part of those creative partnerships. In the craft workshops and the creative partnerships, the boundaries between public and private are partially collapsed through the shared language of making. In the oral history interviews, participants emphasised sharing stories and ideas rather than exchanging techniques and skills, as exemplified by Adrian Potter's statement in his oral history interview. If Shima and I learn skills from each other, that's really great. Certainly there's benefits that are intangible, that far outweigh anything. I don't really care if I learn skills from Shima. I don't know if she is going to learn skills from me. It's not about skills per se, it's more about a kind of cultural sharing. That's the way I see it. So here the value of craft work, especially in the cross-cultural context of the project, became about these moments of sharing, and in the workshops and in the creative partnerships, stories became a lot more important than the skills learnt. So I'll just start by outlining the project. It was a very multifaceted project. It started in 2009. The organisation Craft South is, formerly Craft South, Guildhouse, is a South Australian-based organisation that has members who are artists and craftspeople, and it does promote projects to assist its members and to promote craft in the state. And they started this project out of a perceived need to try to stop migrants, in particular refugees, from losing their craft skills once they migrate to Australia, because we had quite a number of organisations approach Craft South, Guildhouse. I'm sorry, I'm finding it very hard to say Guildhouse, saying that they had clients who have these amazing traditional skills and they weren't having any support to do them here in South Australia. And often people who migrate to a new country are focused on finding work, finding a new home, and these sort of skills get lost along the way. So part of the project was professional development activities for the artists, which might be helping them with how to do contracts, how to find exhibition spaces, how to approach markets and sell your work, how to price your work, that sort of thing. And then we also had, there was a number of people who weren't ready to teach their skills to a wider public, so they taught within their own cultural groups, and that was a way to keep passing the skills on within their own cultural communities. And also that was a very sort of safe space where women could meet and discuss their lives, which I'll talk about a bit more later. And then we had the public workshop program, which these slides are from, and that was artists such as Miss Yuma, who's in the slide, teaching their skills to South Australian artists and the wider public. And a lot of the people who came to the workshops were already artists themselves or craftspeople themselves. So that over 3 years we had about 10 workshops each year in different skills. So this one was Bangladeshi quilt embroidery or camphor making that Miss Yuma taught. And you'll probably see in the slides that a lot of the workshops took place around a table, lots of people making around a table. Razia Beganovic teaching Bosnian sock weaving. Ahmad Javid Rashidi teaching knotted rug weaving, and he was one of the inspirations to start the project because I met him when I was working on another project, and he was talking about how he couldn't keep, there's no carpet weaving industry here in Australia, and he'd been working in that industry for 20 years in Iran. Mili or Melete Sasega Ogbalidet, who taught Eritrean basket weaving. More people sitting around the table. Olawale Ogini, who taught Nigerian indigo dyeing, and there was the only man who taught during the project, and mainly the skills were in textiles, but there was also woodworking technique, which was taught by Shima Golami. This is Iranian inlay. That's Shima. And that was the one I made in the workshop, because I was working on the project as a project officer. I got to do all the workshops as well. Horia Yusufi, who taught Afghan embroidery. Horia is a Hazara woman from Afghanistan. And it's very intricate embroidery, very tiny embroidery. To conclude the project, we did creative partnerships, and that involved 5 South Australian artists working with 5 of the traditional craftspeople, and the South Australian artists had to apply to be part of the program. So Masuma and Kay were one of the partners who did that program, and they worked together for 8 months, making work together, and we didn't really prescribe how they needed to do that process. It was just, the guidelines were just that you would be sharing techniques, ideas, that sort of thing. So this is one of the groups, Lady Larves Penalosa and Jelena Haynes. Lady is from Colombia, and she had been teaching Colombian basket weaving and mollers, which is a reverse applique technique for us, and she worked with Jelena, who is a textiles artist. Jelena's also from the Philippines, but she'd been living in South Australia for quite some time.
Is that what she's wearing?
No, it's not. Jelena is wearing a felted top that she's made, and that's their felted work behind them. So for their work, they decided to do felting, which is Jelena's technique, but do motifs that would be derived from mollers, which is Lady's technique. But they used Australian animals in all of their work. So there's a swan and a sea turtle there. This is Lisa Furno, who is a South Australian jewellery maker, and Millie, who you saw earlier. And they did intensely teach each other skills. So Millie taught Lisa how to weave basketry, and they made the top of the lamp here themselves. And then Lisa taught Millie how to do this sort of piecework. And it's quite not a very good slide, but there's tiny dots all over this lampshade. Oh, it doesn't look like it on here. Olawale, who taught Nigerian indigo for us, with Simone Tippett, who's a South Australian printmaker and photographer. And they both were obsessed with blue, and it was a really great partnership because they just both love blue. And they both wear blue constantly. And they worked in a quite a different way from any of the other partnerships, where they sort of just experimented and tried lots and lots of different techniques. And Olawale learned some printmaking techniques, and Simone had already been doing the indigo dyeing workshops. And she actually ended up volunteering for all of the indigo white workshops for us because she loved it so much. That's one of their works. It's about 2 metres square. Adrian Potter worked with Shima Golami, who is the Iranian inlay maker, and Adrian's a local furniture maker, originally from Canberra and Melbourne, but has been living in South Australia for quite some time. This is the work they made. The motif in the centre is based on a carpet design that Shima had drawn, and then they did the piecework behind. And what's interesting is that they didn't end up really doing very much inlay. The back is sort of pieced together, but they ended up carving the motif instead. And so just some photos of the partners, Masuma and Kay, with their work behind them. And Kay and Masuma will talk more about their work, so I won't really introduce it very much. And this is just a view of the exhibition. So as part of the project, that side of the project, I did some oral histories with all of the artists involved. And that was really sort of to continue on that interest in the storytelling that came out of all the workshops, and that's what I'll be talking about more in this paper. So in the exhibition in this particular venue, which is Murray Bridge, you could listen to the stories on headphones while you're looking at the work. In Prospect Gallery, you could actually carry an iPod around with you so you could look at the work more closely. The oral histories are also on the Guildhouse website now, under projects if you want to have a look, and in the State Library collection. There's just some views of the exhibition. So the exhibition went to Murray Bridge Regional Gallery, Prospect Gallery and Art Images Gallery. Look at there. So as I said earlier, throughout the workshops and the creative partnerships, there was a great emphasis on cultural sharing and personal stories. Esther Leslie discusses Walter Benjamin's connection of craft making with narrative in her article, Walter Benjamin, Chasers of Craft. She writes, "The story and the pot are formed by a life that has something to tell." She highlights Benjamin's use of the travelling journeyman and master craftsperson in his writing on the alienating effects of mass production and industrialisation. These small localised industries, such as cloth production, traditionally had people who would travel from centre to centre to learn their crafts, and whilst they're there, they'll tell stories about where they had been or the news from a different area. So craft and story were very linked at that period in time, and that was something that was lost with the advent of industrialisation. The best listeners, insists Benjamin, are the ones who have half forgotten themselves, and while their half-conscious minds are engaged in pot-throwing, spinning and weaving, and their bodies seized by the gentle rhythm of work, the stories they hear forgo an existence on paper, imprinting themselves into the listener's fantasy, awaiting retransmissions, afterlives. This intimates how experiences pass into and out of memory. For Benjamin, to reflect on the operations of storytelling or craft communication and experience is to ponder the arabesque of labour, experience and selfhood. When I interviewed Kay for the Creative Partnership Oral Histories, she spoke of a similar slowing down of the body and mind as she wove her tapestries. She said, "The slowness of the medium actually became an advantage, that you didn't have to think really quickly all the time, that you could sort of ponder and think yourself into the image as you were weaving it. And then some of the passages that were easier to weave, I think you enter this sort of meditative state, where half your mind is engaged with what you're doing and the other part of your mind is sort of pondering things, just sort of drifting." Leslie, Benjamin and Kay are all speaking about this space of reverie that opens up when you're making and doing repetitive actions. This is a space that people talk about when they say things like, you just get lost in it, or time just seems to pass. They're also talking about a sense of openness or receptiveness to letting these thoughts drift in, or letting the stories drift into your mind and become part of who you are. And I think that this state of openness also occurred during the craft workshops. People just became more open to telling stories that were quite intimate, or finding things out about other people that were quite personal. Sue Rowley, who is a textiles theorist, also chronicles the entanglement of narrative and craft, as shown through countless fairy tales and common language terms that are referred to, that refer to craft objects. She writes that the ubiquity of craft objects and processes in these stories is symptomatic of the importance of these objects to the construction of our identities, both personally and collectively. Storytelling and craft making are both a construction of self, as Eritrean basket maker Millie stated in her Creative Partnership interview. "I feel very excited. I was so happy. I didn't know before that people are really interested to know about my craft. I thought this is only for my community, but I find that there are so many people and they need to share what they know, and they also know what others do. So I find this a very interesting part of my life. I have learned a lot. I have learned a lot. That everything is important, everything is knowledge. Because I know how to make a basket since early in my life, it seemed to me like everyone would know. I was wrong. This is something new for others. And people were the same thing. They would be like the same thing, like they were telling us about what they do in their culture. This is something new for me, which I have learned. So yes, it feels good, because this is part of me and I'm sharing who I am. I feel good." Millie's emphasis on sharing who she is in this comment highlights the integration of craft making with the maker's notion of their selfhood. She also talks about how the people she met during her workshops had a strong need to share what they know as well, and to share themselves. Many of the participants in the workshops were makers themselves, as I said earlier, both professional artists and amateur artists and craftspeople. The workshops became a place where these constructions of the self as maker could be shared in an open manner, where the maker in the other could be recognised. The tradition of handing on craft techniques, usually in a familial setting, spans many cultures. The communal coming together to make craft is common in many countries that the traditional craftspeople who taught in the project have come from. As Ms. Yuma said in her interview, Kantha is very close to our culture because it's like it gave the women, the housewives, the space to share their emotion. When they used to make Kantha all together, they used to talk about their happiness and sorrows. It's like social counselling and something like that, handling their problems and getting away from their anxieties. Although these traditions are no longer so prevalent in Western society, in craft workshops there was a sense of connection through learning about each other's crafts. As I said earlier, the workshops took place mainly around tables, and the shared table has connotations of sharing a meal together as well, of breaking bread, of sharing your lives. The notion that craft-making circles are a safe place to share and de-stress have been used by migrant and service organisations in structuring their programs. For example, Sophia Qatari, who I worked with closely during this project from the Muslim Women's Association, had set up a series of sewing workshops where women could go and learn sewing skills, and this was culturally acceptable for them. But at the same time, she would run very serious health programs as part of this, nutrition programs. So it was a space where it was safe for women to learn this because it was acceptable for them to go. So not only are these craft-making circles and workshops seen as a safe space, the crafts themselves are seen as something more real or meaningful. As South Australian jewellery maker Lisa Furno said on why she applied to do her creative partnership, I think because of my past experience with the bamboo weaver in Laos and the desert weavers at the jam factory, and then the crocheting workshop at Craft South, it really tends to hit. I don't know, it tends to hit a very real note with me because it's handcrafted and it's quite real what it's speaking. Do you know what I mean? Handcrafts have experienced a resurgence in recent years, as shown in the advent of the slow craft and slow cooking movements that seek to reinsert the handmade into society. Craft makers could be seen as arguing with the world by calling for a slower, quieter way of life, calling for importance to be placed on the economy of the handmade, on the personal, the intergenerational, and a sense of something more honest. As Joe Turney writes on craft objects used in oral history interviews, the object acts as a cultural marker, representative of the making process, of a journey or time that is symbolic not just of constructive leisure, but of wider relationships with kin, community, and global citizenship. Most of the techniques, as I said earlier, were textiles techniques. And these are everyday processes. Yet the processes of making these crafts, especially in the collaborative and workshop setting, can also become quite extraordinary. Lisa Furno speaks about her creative partnership with Millie. It's the process of doing it as well that's so beautiful. Like we sit there and we weave together and kind of just sit there and talk about everything under the sun and getting to know her as a person. I don't know, it's like it's not just the end product that's beautiful, it's the whole. It's kind of the whole process that's quite amazing. I'm very lucky. Throughout the workshops, the divide between ordinary and extraordinary was often crossed. Hoya Yusufi, who taught Afghan embroidery for the project, sews her exquisite fine embroidery onto everyday items such as pillows, baby blankets and clothing, objects that are meant to be used. Hoya was surprised that the participants in her workshop handled her textiles so carefully when to her they were part of the mess of life. In the workshops, her work entered a different economy. Lady Narvaez Penaloza, who taught the techniques of Colombian bark string crochet and mollers, had a similar experience. She stated in her interview, "In Colombia or in my house with my mother, my grandmother's house, all this stuff was normal, was part of the normal, and everybody had a mochila, which is a bark string bag. And that's normal, and nobody cared if you know how to make it or not. It's cheap to buy it in the corner of the street because, you know, people take this stuff and go to the street and put it on the floor, and people could buy it." So nobody appreciate the work. Nobody appreciate that is something that is very, very Colombian and very traditional for us. When I come here and I teach my first workshop, it was amazing to know how everybody looked at the colours and was fascinated with the tradition and all the history about it. It was amazing. The everyday crafts became extraordinary when viewed through a different cultural lens. This was not, however, an exoticising lens, but rather craftspeople appreciating the work of other craftspeople. Here the language of making, which includes the knowledge of how long it takes to stitch a motif or how hard it is to produce such fine stitches, becomes a conduit between cultures, where the histories of makers converge. As Iranian inlay artist Shima stated in her interview. And the other thing is that these cultural values that are embedded inside these artworks from so long distances can connect these cultures to each other and can transfer this culture. So I'd just like to invite Kay and Shima to come up. When I pass this on, I pass both. Okay, so I'd just like to start by asking Kay about why she applied to do the Creative Partnership.
I had participated in the Cancer workshop with Musuma, and I found I loved it. Partly because I did embroidery when I was at art school, and as a child I absolutely hated it. I carted around these dirty pieces of embroidery for years. But I think at this stage in my life there's something about the inwardness of the process of embroidery, that sort of attention you give to the stitch, that actually suits me. But I also really enjoyed learning Bangladeshi embroidery and the simplicity of what you could do with a running stitch, which is the most basic stitch of all. So I was interested in the process. And I'm also very interested in community collaborative work with other artists. I've been involved in a lot of community tapestry projects over time. And I also wanted to learn more about Masuma's culture and the Cancer embroideries in a way represent so much about women's beliefs and women's lives. And so that was my motivation.
So can either of you or both of you describe the process of how you came up with your artworks from the first time you met together? Mashima, would you like to go first?
This actually, every moment of this project I enjoyed very much. From my first project, first workshop, I met with Kay, and I was very, I liked her personality, and when Kirsty asked me to do another project with partnership with Kay, I was very happy. And every time Kay used to come at my house for the meeting, what we are going to do for the project, first she came and Kay told me what we are going to do, like something from our life. The name of our work was Home, and which in Bengali is Basha, very close to our life. Every person needs a peaceful home. So I enjoyed very much when I am doing the pieces. And first meeting we decided how many pieces we are going to do, what type of material we are using, and what type of images we will do. And then slowly, in second meeting, we draw the images, and slowly You can tell.
Traditionally, a cantha is a large, often a large quilt that is stitched all over. It wasn't really possible for Masuma and I to work on one piece together because we both had really busy lives. And for Masuma to get to my house would have taken her 2.5 hours each way by bus. So it just was complicated. So we always met at her place and decided to make, rather than one big work, we would make a set of smaller images about this theme of home. And it was a very loose collaboration in terms of the design. Masuma wanted to use images from Bangladesh, like the peacock, which is a traditional image. And so in a sense it became a bit like call and response. She'd suggest an idea and I'd think, oh, well, what sort of birds could I embroider? And so I chose to do a set of magpies. And so it happened like that. So then Masuma decided to do, actually the first embroidery piece she did was a village in Bangladesh. And I started thinking about this notion of village life. And I live at Uradla in the Adelaide Hills. And of course the oval, the football oval, is the key of community life there. So I actually decided I would base all my images around the Uradla oval. But there's no sport taking place. This is what happens, outside the sporting contest. So in a sense our images sort of developed over time, and we didn't actually ever sit together and stitch because we were so busy. That would have been a wonderful thing to do, but embroidery is very time consuming, and we thought we only had about 5 months at the beginning, and then they extended the project, so we were racing to get the work done.
Can you actually just hear me without the microphone? Yep.
Yeah, let's do it without it. Yeah, hang on. Forward. Oh, okay, we'll keep it. We'll hold
okay.
it in the middle.
Yeah. Okay, so, Kay, I believe that Masuma taught you some stitches as you were going along with the process. Were there any other things that you taught each other as part of the project, technique-wise?
Well, no, it was a fairly one-way process. Masuma taught me. And basically, she had taught me a number of these stitches at the collaborative workshop. Of course, I forgot. So I'd have to race around to her place and say, how do you do this one? And each embroidery, I just tried to focus on one stitch so that I could master it.
Actually, I want to add here, it's not only about the stitches. I learned from Kay like professional techniques, how to hang a art piece or how to take care of it, and other agreement and all these things for arranging a workshop or something like that. So I learned all these technical things from Kay. And also in terms of stitches, I love the application. The same stitches Kay learned from me, but when she was applying, it was in her unique own way, a little bit different way. It's really impressed me how she did the ground and other thing, how she applied the stitches. It's the beauty of this fusion of multicultural, I think, this type of project.
This is some of them. So that's the Uradla oval up to the top, and the student's village.
And Cobbledick is actually, round the Uradla Oval, the football sponsors have their signs. And Cobbledick is the name of a company, the agricultural company that produces vegetables. And there's actually another embroidery of the vegetables they produce that's taken from their sign. Because Masuma had, if I just hold this one, Masuma had embroidered a little cantha of mushrooms and snails, and I was thinking, well, what can I do that's about produce? And so that's what I decided I'd do, the Cobbledick sign.
Actually, in my case, when I'm doing something here in Australia, only not I'm enjoying, back in my country, my family also very excited what I'm doing here, especially my dad. So when I signed for the agreement, my dad was suggesting me something like from our country, the photo like this, photo village. So in childhood, whenever we draw a drawing about in school, we do this type of things like river, house, and boats, mountains. It's a common.
I'll hold it up when you talk.
Yeah. Then it's also very interesting, like when I'm looking back, what moment I should pick from my life. Like in this one represent me and my son. So it was, I really enjoyed that, and that's why like I'm remembering everything of my life from my childhood.
So, in both of your interviews, as well as the other artists' interviews, you spoke about the non-tangible things that you learnt from each other when doing the project. Do you want to talk a bit about some of those questions?
Yeah, it's not only about the craft. I asked her about the lifestyle question, like how to raising a child in Australia, because our culture and Australian culture, the school environment are completely different. So this type of suggestion and ideas from her, and also like the building condition and cooking, gardening, all these things also the part of the work and the craft work.
Yeah, I think Ms. Nimmer asked me lots of questions about the education system and how children relate to parents in Australia. Because, and I think in a way, I was able to interpret aspects of Australian culture that she found sort of puzzling or so different from Bangladesh.
And you learnt from that process as well.
Yes.
Yes. Because you said in your interview that it made you look at the world around you differently.
Yeah, well, I suppose it does. It makes you start looking at your own culture and sort of, rather than taking it for granted, seeing its particularities. And I became very aware of the sort of the casualness, I suppose, of relationships between parents and children in Australia, and perhaps the different formalities that might shape parental relationships with children in Bangladesh. But we also talked about, schooling, like the important, I suppose, when children go to school, it's an environment that can shape them. And I think Lucinda was slightly anxious about the school her son was going to. So we sort of talked about the different sort of schools within a society and within Adelaide, and some of the problems that can arise from that.
Yeah, if I like to compare, in our country we believe from childhood our education should go straight, like from kindy to master's degree. There is no break. We have to complete our study. But here, after talking to Kay, I understand. If you have some breaking, we believe it's wasting of time, wasting your time. But here, Kay told me, if you are breaking the school and then for a couple of years you are doing practical job, so you know better that what you're going to do, what you are going to enjoy. You will understand yourself better after breaking, and later you can complete deciding. Then after you can complete your study, and it will be clear to you what you are going to do in your life. So this type of things comes in front of me.
And Kay, you wrote an article reflecting back on the process of the creative partnerships. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I got really interested in the space of cancer making and that notion of sharing stories, but also how we were both changed by that process, making process. So I was invited to write an article for an architectural theory magazine, journal, and the topic was on the margins. So I wrote an essay that really looked at cancer as a sort of space of making that I was trying to remember. I suppose that it was both a space of encounter between women from different cultures, but it was also a place of becoming where we were both changed by the processes that we were engaged with as well as the conversations. It was really interesting to sort of dwell and think about what had actually had happened, and then try and put it into a context. But when I was writing it, then I'd have to ring up Masuma and ask her more questions about her biography, because of course there were sort of gaps in the things that we exchanged. So that added, I suppose that added another layer to the process.
So during the oral history interviews, I asked each of the artists and craftspeople to talk through their process of how they made their craft, and actually I found that a lot of them found that very difficult to do because it's such an everyday thing for them. It's so tacit. Did either of you find that difficult?
No.
No. You've done it so many times.
Well, I think also I've been engaged in an oral history project myself, interviewing embroiderers who participated in the Parliament House Embroidery Project. And because I'm really interested in process, I was actually asking them questions about, you know, what the process meant to them and, within their life and how it might have changed over time. So I suppose I was attuned to that particular question. I've thought about it quite a lot.
So is there any questions from the audience?
This sounds like an ideal learning environment as opposed to a formal so your immigrants might be learning, trying to learn about the new cultural language stuff. Like it could be something that could develop into a more productive environment where the two cultures are sort of enmeshing, and it could be applied to all sorts of other but as you gain so much, it doesn't sound like there's anything negative side to it. But would there be a negative side? Were there any negatives?
No. In my case, no. Actually, in our country, our concentration is very materialistic, like profession and other thing, earning money. But after doing this artwork and other thing, I understand how to. It's especially nourishing the root, the tradition. What we don't bother in our country much. In making kata, it's like who don't have proper education or proper job they are doing at home or pastime. But here it's very important sharing. So I learn it from here. It's like taking care of your root, not only the fruit.
And for the other creative partnerships, the partnerships aren't all smooth running. There are difficulties and people have time constraints, as Kay said. So it's not always a utopian experience, I guess. But it does have enormous benefits. And the workshops as well.
I think the focus is on the process, really. I mean, I think that's a really important part. I mean, the things that we make are the outcomes of that, but they're not the most important thing.
What the artists was that? I mean, did you apply, Kay, to be in a particular art form, or was it?
I said when I applied that I had done the Colombian basketry as well. So I said that I'd like to do the Cantha, but if that wasn't available, I would like to do the Colombian basketry. But I really wanted to work with Masuma, so I put that in my application.
Yeah, but people do say in their applications that some of them we just paired up based on their skills base. And Adrian, we actually asked him if he'd like to do it, because Sheena had enjoyed working with him in the workshop.
The time frame of the project, so 5 months, but then it got extended, and that extension was.
Oh, that was due to the exhibition spaces being available? Yeah.
So from sort of grow to go to get to exhibition, did you have a year to work, including the editing of the oral history, I suppose you...
That was done very fast, actually.
Kirsty got a job in Canberra, so she had to do it fast.
Yes. Yeah, it was, I think, ended up being about a year.
Yeah, overall.
Yeah, and then the exhibitions were toured for about 6 months. And the oral histories, I think I did in October last year, and then they were ready for the exhibition in March.
And they sort of sound bites, aren't they?
They are, so each individual pair has their stories, their sections that you can click on.
But they're up on the website.
The Guildhouse website, which is guildhouse.org.au, and then if you just click on programs, it's under there.
And in the exhibition space, because you had so many...
Yeah, they were played during the exhibition so people could just listen to the stories while they were looking at the work. And they're also in the Prospect Gallery, I'm not sure about Murray Bridge, they had interpretive panels next to the works as well, explaining how they were made and who made them.
There's a little catalogue that was produced for the exhibition as well, and I think in Prospect they reproduced some of the information in the catalogue on the walls.
And the full audio of the interviews is at the library at the time.
Get the opportunity to create more work for exhibition or participate.
Yeah, sure, I love to. I would love to do more. I enjoyed very much sharing my story, my tradition, and learning more from others. Like learning, when we met Kay first workshop, Kay was collecting some buttons. Can you remember?
Yes.
So I feel it's a very interesting thing, collecting buttons with a wish.
Oh, that's right. I was at the first workshop when I learnt the technique with the sim. I'm doing a project of my own called Your Heart's Desire, where people get the opportunity to think about their heart's desire and write it in a little artist book that I bring. But they also give me a button and I attach it to I thread it on a string, and I'm collecting 1,000 heart's desires and 1,000 buttons. So I took my project along to the workshop and Masuma participated. So tell us what your heart's desire was.
Oh, okay.
I don't think it was one of those intimate desires.
No, yeah, I really
Told me.
No, it was, I can't remember exactly, maybe it was, I was a high school teacher in my country, so the desire was to start my teaching career again here.
Yes.
And Masuma has gone on to work for other organisations doing projects. And you also work for a designer.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, since I came here from 2009, I'm working for an Australian designer. Her name is Sally Phillips, and I'm doing the fusion between traditional stitch and contemporary fashion design. I do lots of neck pieces and embellishment for her. So it's also I enjoy a lot.
Notice you're holding some of the pieces that were in the exhibition. So, are they going to be archived, or the pieces that were made, or were they booked?
Well, they were supposed to be up for sale, but
Yeah.
They were up for sale, so.
well, mine weren't.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what's really interesting about making embroidery, you put so many hours of labour into it that you never really get financial recompense for the work. And so with mine, I thought I might, reuse them or incorporate them into other works. So I've still got mine. But one of the gallery directors wanted the price to be lower, but we refused because there is an aspect of textiles that when it is so labour intensive, you can't really get a sort of an economic reward for your work. So it opens up that question: do you really need to sell it? Yeah.
That's because textile. Up for the prejudice, fine art, so-called. That's what it used to be, just painting, sculpture. As we said, it's different.
I think there is a hierarchy, and in the visual arts and in craft as well, and textiles often is sort of down near the bottom. But I also think there's a tradition within women's domestic work where you make textile objects as gifts and exchange. So they don't enter the sort of money economy so much as a different kind of economy of relationships. And I think that actually affects the way that they are valued, in money terms. So there's a sort of tension there. But Masuma really needs, to work to, earn a living. And so I suppose she could probably get better paid using her textile skills working for Sally Phillips than she would be able to by making and selling her camphor embroideries.
Can I just ask you a few questions about the history process? Like, were you both involved in the questions, like the questions that were asked during the process, or were the questions designed by you, or was it that a collaborative process as well?
Well, it was the first time I'd formally done oral histories. I had done oral histories before for various art projects, but that was sort of as a means to an end to make designs for work. So I did the oral history training at the State Library with OHAA, and I did take their advice to have the first meeting to discuss what could come up in the interviews with all the interviewees. And then I sort of developed questions further from that, and I tailored them to each of the artists.
Didn't you say that there was some interest in the process at
Oh,
the State
and
Library? Yeah.
I think it was the Oral History Association said they were interested in recording processes because some of the processes could be lost in the future. So getting a record of how you do the stitching or how you treat the cloth or that sort of thing. Yeah.
Actually, that was really interesting because I've been interviewed before, but people never ask you, how you make something or what that might mean. And that was actually a really interesting part of those questions I found really interesting to me, to be able to sort of talk about that aspect of practice, which is often just taken for granted.
Make interesting video installations, wouldn't they, the process?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking conceptually that
They would.
would be very interesting to see or, to actually sort of document the process.
Mm.
And particularly the textile field, that's something that's involved in creating this cloth, mechanically or by hand. People forget about that part of the history.
Definitely.
It would have been like just thinking, both of your hand techniques. Quite interesting.
When I did my PhD, I was focused very much on gestures of people, and I think that is really interesting. It would be interesting to have recorded the interviews and see how people move their hands as if they were using a saw or when they're talking about it and all that type of thing. Yeah.
Combining the oral history, hearing the voice, watching the hand.
Because it's very bodily. I mean,
Yes,
I suppose
very
most sort of craft practices are. You use your whole body, and knowledge is sort of tacit, so often you're not even aware of what you're doing. So to verbalise it can actually sometimes be, it can be quite hard.
But we both. So I just thought